you can create a news story completely with AI and serve it to people, but it just will not have the same human feeling. Like there's just, I think people can understand and feel that human connection. They know, and they almost know it deep down when there's been a human in the loop. And I'm saying that now. It might be in 2 years, I might be looking back and thinking, wow, I was totally wrong about this.
Hi, welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast that dives into how AI is changing media, news, and communication. I'm your host, Pete Pachal. I covered tech for a long time as a journalist, and now I have deep discussions with the media players, the builders, and the creators who are answering the question, how will we get information in the future, and how will that change the practice of news gathering and the business of media? I'm excited this week to talk to someone working on one of the most urgent jobs in journalism right now, helping people tell what to trust. It's Alex Mahadevan. He's the director of MediaWise, Poynter's digital media literacy initiative, and he also leads AI efforts at Poynter as a faculty member. Alex sits right at the intersection of newsroom practice and public education, thinking about how journalists, students, and everyday readers can build the skills to work with AI without losing the fundamentals of verification, context, and accountability. Alex, welcome to the Media Copilot. Boy, I that sounded serious, I just realized. Is your job that serious? Tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are and your role at Poynter and how it all came to be.
Yeah, so my background from the very beginning was actually in economics and statistics. I got into journalism during the Great Recession. There weren't a lot of jobs out there for economists at the time, even though there probably should have been. So I started as a business journalist. I worked at weekly newsrooms. I was always the youngest person on staff at a network of weekly newspapers called The Observer. So I was always sort of thrown the new technology, the new hotness in journalism. So I lived through the pivot to video era. I was thrown a video camera and told to record 2 videos a day. I was the newsletter guy. At one point, I was sending out 2 newsletters a day. I was a digital editor who listened to the cop reports and edited stories and played around with CMSs. So I've sort of always been at the intersection of technology and journalism and distribution and tools and audience. And so in 2019, I came to Poynter after working as a data journalism in the digital publishing world. And I worked on a program, which I'm now the director of, called MediaWise, which was started to basically help young people across the country make sense of the news, spot misinformation, and hopefully trust journalists more. And so since then, MediaWise has expanded to work with older adults, Spanish speakers. We're in like 13 or 14 countries around the world. And so AI really came into my life and portfolio through the disinformation side of things. When ChatGPT came out at the end of 22, as a tinkerer and data journalist, the first thing I wanted to do was break it. And as a media literacy educator, the first thing I wanted to do was show people what this could do to the information ecosystem. So I immediately generated a network of fake news websites. I generated the code to put them online. I put them up on my GitHub, briefly hosted them for a second, just to show how in like 30 minutes, I could take this tool and generate a ton of disinformation. And so I used it as a teaching tool immediately. But someone eventually came to Poynter and said in early 23, hey, we're hearing about this new ChatGPT thing. Do you have anyone on staff who can teach us how to use it? And so they said, my boss or bosses said, hey, Alex, you know how to play with this stuff. You've been tinkering with it, put together a training and curriculum around it. So it kind of all started there. And then it's just since then, ballooned. And right now I run the AI Innovation Lab here at Poynter, which brings together a lot of the AI work that I've done and that Poynter does for citizens, for journalists around AI ethics as well.
Nice. Wow, it's a lot. That's a very cool evolution, but it also sounds very familiar, having been a tech journalist and formerly the youngest person in many newsrooms. Definitely resonates, getting thrown a lot of new things. and then you're just kind of expected to know it, and you're building skills at the same time. Lots of questions from that. Obviously, you mentioned media trust and building that up. So if there's ever been a time where that's direly needed and some more effort there, it's probably now. Of course, now things are directing to AI, but that of course is um, a huge factor in trust in media now. Though honestly, maybe not necessarily entirely negative. Can you like, obviously we don't need to rehash the whole relitigate what's going on with media trust these days, but with AI specifically in the mix, how have you seen things change, both on the journalist side and the reader side, in terms of what it's doing to trust in the ecosystem?
Well, immediately we realized that there was going to be a trust issue when it came to journalists using AI. I think when ChatGPT came out, it might have been the year where we hit like our low in terms of like what like Pew and others were saying, how people felt about trust in journalism and trust in the media. So, immediately what we realized is we need to have public ethics policies around AI, because people are starting to see AI embedded in their everyday experience. They were getting AI overviews on Google that were telling them to put glue on pizza and things like that. And so the last thing we wanted was people to start getting suspicious about how journalists were using AI. So Poynter immediately put together a summit on AI ethics in journalism. We've done 2 of them since. And the goal was, let's bring together a bunch of news leaders and figure out what should be the guiding principles around AI use in journalism, and how can we communicate those to the public, because AI is complicating things for journalists. That's a very mild way of putting it. It's really upending the news, but it's also a really good opportunity for us to reestablish a relationship with the audience. That's what we realized, is that by updating our editorial guidelines to include AI policies, by starting to include disclosures on where we used AI, we were almost making another agreement with the audience around transparency and around explaining how we do the news, how we create the news. So I saw it as, this is a good opportunity to sort of reset the relationship between us and news consumers, because they're going to start coming across news in completely new ways, via chatbots, via what they're seeing in AI overviews. It's up to us to reestablish our relationship with them and reestablish that transparency. So we're almost like both of these groups, news consumers and journalists and editors in newsrooms, we are navigating this like new information ecosystem together. And so what has always been really important for us is, how can we bridge that divide and basically bring our audience into this journey together? If I'm a newsroom and I am creating a chatbot to help them understand, elections in their town better, how can we bring them into the conversation? How can we be transparent about how we're using this tool and explain to them why we're using this tool? And so concurrently, we are able to do our jobs better. We're able to create new products that make their lives better, but we're also able to help them understand how AI fits into the new information ecosystem. Honestly, just how it works.
Hmm. Yeah. And, there's a lot wrapped in there, like particularly around disclosure, and what, not just disclosure that you might have used AI, but you mentioned chatbots specifically. So I'd love to talk about that for a second, just because I feel like when you have a chatbot, whether it's a public one like Perplexity or ChatGPT, or one that's like specific to your media site, I feel like we're now kind of used to the idea that they sometimes, muck things up and get things wrong. Not that that makes it okay, but it is like, I do sometimes wonder. So you mentioned sort of like an election style chatbot or something, or it could be anything. Honestly, I remember the Journal did something on iPhone reviews a couple of years ago. And the idea that you go to it and then, okay, I ask it for something, and there's a predicted level of query that you try to plan around, but you can't plan around every single scenario. And yeah, you put in guardrails, but someone's going to try to break it and then make it say something weird, and there's always a chance that could happen, and then someone screenshots it, and then, oh no, like, to what extent should we be I know there isn't a hard and fast answer on either one of these, but I often sometimes think journalists might sometimes set the bar too high on these things. If you're kind of like doing things with it that aren't really the use case, um, and show it's breaking, is that really showing that AI doesn't work? You know what I mean? Yes, AI has problems and things can go wrong, but the mere existence of hallucinations, particularly if you have setting the right expectation, I don't think necessarily should mean something um, shouldn't be done. I don't know. What is your guidance on this, if you have any?
Yeah. So it's funny, 2 years ago, the joke was, uh, not everything has to be a chatbot. And it was sort of like this running joke where, why are newsrooms investing in creating chatbots? And it was sort of this kind of funny thing that we would do. But since then, it's sort of, the Washington Post's entire search is essentially a chatbot. And I think people are recognizing the value in even just like building a chat product, and the idea of like getting your archives into something that is machine readable. So, so it works with your chatbot, but then also it is, palatable to the machines that are now pulling our content and serving them to readers elsewhere. But the fact that people are starting to expect to have some sort of conversational people, I think, are getting used to conversing with content much quicker than I ever thought they would have. So I think there is value in experimenting with chatbots, even if you know that they might, hallucinate, which we call, errors. I've started trying to stop myself from calling them hallucinations and refer to them only as errors. But you can design these chatbots to really reduce the probability. And then as long as you are very, very, very clear in your disclosure that that is a possibility, I still think it is worth doing. And the thing is, like, we have these archives. We can do, retrieval augmented generation to reduce hallucinations. You can include links. You can train it on your content to the point where the probability is almost so close to zero that it is worth, rolling out something like that. I created an internal chatbot for PolitiFact staff that essentially they can paste in a claim from a politician or a draft they might be working on, and it searches the archive of 26,000 plus fact checks that they've done using retrieval augmented generation. It finds patterns and essentially tells them, hey, in the past, here's how we've sort of rated similar claims. And here are some other things that you might want to look into. And so, this is a tool that I'm using in perhaps, a situation where you have the highest bar. This is fact checkers that I'm using this tool with, but it has been designed to try to get around those errors as much as it possibly can. So it comes down to the design, it comes down to the disclosure. But I think you were sort of getting at this, is that people are really expecting an experience, and there is a bit of an expectation from the user that if they're conversing with a chatbot, that errors are possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sometimes call this sort of the fuzziness, which it without judgment, really. It's just kind of a fact that, like, because AI is now in the ecosystem, there's a fuzziness that we've all had to get used to, and extra skepticism, which can be bad or good. But I do think that expectations around it are different. Now, again, that doesn't mean everything, and I do think the media and journalism has to set a different standard generally. But when we're talking about tools, it has to be kind of case by case. I'd love to switch gears to media literacy, because I know you work a lot on that, and you talked about designing curricula for newsrooms. I'd love to know, like, what you're seeing today versus how journalists and newsrooms and teams were perceiving it, 6 months, a year ago. I feel like there's a natural skepticism that people in the news business have around AI, which is healthy. But I also feel like that the pace has been so rapid, and some of these tools are clearly so useful that I feel like the temperature is different today. Not that everyone's like, hey, AI me up or whatever, but I do think there's a sort of a growing movement to like get ahead of this and leverage these tools. Is that what you're seeing? And then what would you say is also the average sort of literacy? What do you count as like good literacy in a newsroom?
I think there's a serious divide, actually.
Oh, interesting.
I think if you look at the average, like if you were to rate someone's enthusiasm about AI from 1 to 10, and you were to pull a sample of 1,000 journalists, and you were to average that number out, it would be higher now than it was 6 months ago or a year ago. Because, like you said, the capabilities of the tools are off the charts. They are, compared to 6 months ago or a year ago, they're incredibly useful in journalism. But that's just the average. I think what you're seeing is you're seeing AI skeptics in newsrooms that are sort of remaining or even getting more skeptical of AI. And then you're seeing AI enthusiasts who are just going to town with Claude Code, and they are using these tools to do things that they never could have done before, and we could get into vibe coding a little bit, but they're sort of realizing, hey, I can open up Claude Code and parse a 14,000 page PDF, get it into something that's machine readable, and start an investigation in 15 minutes, something that would have taken a team 6 months. And so there are people who are tinkering with these tools, playing with these tools, and really going all in. And then there are others that are, really, really resistant. And for good reason. I'm incredibly sympathetic to people who are anti-AI, because these tools do have a lot of issues, and being a journalist, you should have a certain level of skepticism. So what I'm noticing is that while on average newsrooms are getting more comfortable, you are seeing, I think, this AI literacy divide forming. And I think a newsroom's ability to prepare itself for this AI, upending the way that we do our job, depends on how many of those sort of AI enthusiasts and those news nerds. Really, it's like, if you have a news nerd in your newsroom that is very enthusiastic about these tools, then I think you are going to be better prepared for where we are going. We all can't be the New York Times. We all can't be, a team that is designing incredible internal tools to monitor podcasts and do data analysis. But if you don't have these AI experts in your newsroom, you are going to get left behind. And it kind of tracks with, when I talk about the divide, it kind of tracks with what we are seeing with news consumers and with citizens. You're seeing AI skeptics are getting only more skeptical and only more hostile. And on average, though, it's almost kind of going the other way from where I see newsrooms, where you're almost seeing the average skepticism go up. And I think that's in response to the fact that people see AI slop everywhere they go now, and so the concept of it's just, we're almost running into the same thing with where you say, how do you feel about the mainstream media to someone? And it could mean a zillion things to a zillion different people. When you say, how do you feel about AI to someone, the first thing that pops into their head is all of the crap that they're seeing on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So you're seeing this kind of hostility grow, and I think we need to get a better handle on the definitions around AI. We need to get more experts into newsrooms that can explain to skeptics how these tools used responsibly can help us do our jobs better and reach more people and be more impactful.
Have you seen those sort of hardcore skeptics make the transition to the enthusiast side How often does that happen? And what does it usually take to, I guess I might think of it as like channeling that skepticism into maybe a healthy sense of human in the loop, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Because I feel like, and obviously I do my share of AI educating, it's a little bit like AI is not perfect, and that's good news because that means you have a strong role here. You just got to like use the tools and figure out where it is. Did you have variations of that, and how do you see that transition from skeptic to enthusiast, if you see it at all?
It's about showing them that it can actually solve a problem they have. Because what's happening is sort of the same thing that happened, during Web 2.0 and Facebook, et cetera, is you have these tech companies that are trying to control the narrative and telling you this technology is going to, uh, you know, make everything about your life easier, which we know is not true. And so for AI skeptics, it's very easy to say, why are you trying to force this newsroom tool on me when, I know and I'm skeptical of tech companies. So it's about actually showing them what AI can do. So an example I like to use is, I did a AI training for the Tampa Bay Times. And there is a visual journalist at the Times who's been there forever. He's an amazing guy named Dirk, and I was talking to him before the training, I'm always curious how photographers, visual journalists feel about AI because it is very fraught when it comes to visuals. And he was telling me the story about how he had to shoot a drone shot of a bridge, and he was using ChatGPT to figure out what the angle of the sun would be at this time and at this day. So he knew exactly where to park his car, when to get there, when to take the drone up. And I just thought this is just such a great example of using AI creatively to solve a problem that you
Right.
might have. Now there are tools to online to find the angle of the sun, et cetera, et cetera. But it was just, to me, that just struck me as something so creative. And so being able to identify people in a newsroom who are using AI in a really creative way to solve a problem. I keep going back to the, being able to parse a PDF very, very quickly by, asking Claude Code to write you a Python script. And so it goes back to journalism 101, which is show, don't tell. Don't hold an all company meeting and tell me we're going to start using ChatGPT, and it's going to make you more efficient, and we're going to expect X number of stories. That's not
It's
the
probably
way
a
it
bad
works.
idea.
You have to show, here's how this tool is actually going to improve your work, and then on top of that, you have to show how is it improving our audience's lives. How is it allowing us to reach more people with more impactful work?
Nice. Definitely want to pick up on the audience stuff in a bit, but the sticking with sort of newsrooms and newsroom tools, the last few months of the vibe coding slash agent, I don't know what you call it, arrival, acceleration, started with Claude Code. Now there's Cowork. Now there's all these things like Claudebot or OpenClaw, and people are buying Mac Minis to run their lives. It's just, again, I think what you expressed as a divide, I think is very clear, because in that bubble, it's insane, and you're doing all this crazy stuff, and I don't even presume to be doing much of that. Like I'm kind of like very amateur compared to a lot of the people I see on LinkedIn. Um, but it's happening. And yet there are people, like the holdouts. I guess I don't want to sort of relitigate the divide stuff, but I am curious, as this is happening, like what are you seeing from the journalists and media product people you talk to in terms of how this is being applied, and what sort of things that are possible now, if not at all suggesting that every newsroom should suddenly give all their access to a code agent, but in limited ways, what are some possibilities now with regard to investigations, with regard to distribution, with regard to whatever, if you have some limited use of this tool even. Or these tools, I guess. There's a lot of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, there are. So I think it these tools have the ability. So just speaking about just like coding agents, they have the ability to turn anyone into a data journalist. You used to have a very good grasp of how the web works. How, there at NICAR, there's basically like entire workshops dedicated to just like developing a Python script to scrape a web page. That's how I learned to scrape a web page is at NICAR. Now you have agents that can that these coding agents that can scrape hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages for you. You don't have to figure out the structure of a page. It's going to figure out the structure of a page for you. An investigation into like a local government could take 5% of the time, because you can unleash an agent to parse 1,000 emails that happen between county commissioners and a county administrator. You can transcribe. You can translate. There's just so much that can happen so quickly, and it's like what it comes down to is I think it's not even a real technical expertise that you have to start using these tools to do better investigations, to reach the audience in interesting ways. It's just having a curiosity about tinkering with the tools and sort of playing around and seeing what they can actually do, and thinking of what is a task that you do all the time that would be really great. In the beginning, when ChatGPT first came out, for me, my biggest problem was we run something called the Teen Fact Checking Network, and they would turn in these great scripts for TikToks. They would file amazing videos for TikToks, but they would never fill out the caption or the hashtags ever. And we would get tons of these. And for some reason, the kids would just never fill out that last tiny, small bit of work. And it was like, this is sort of something that seems like a total waste of time for me to have to do all of this. And so at the very beginning, it was, create a little custom GPT called TikTok Caption Bot. And now I never have to worry about that. And that was 2 years ago. So now agents can solve this type of problem constantly, all of the time. So, thinking about it, it's really, God, I'm going to say the most cliche thing you've ever heard, but like, it really is. If you can dream it up, you can probably do it with one of these coding agents.
Absolutely. Like what you just articulated there. I mean, it sounds like a lot of manual work that I have done or have managed in other newsrooms, where we used to have, almost every place I worked, but most recently in CoinDesk, like the SEO optimizer guy who would go back through archives, what is the most sort of higher value SEO stuff, and one by one figure out how to optimize. If there was any major changes, they'd have to like clear it with editors or whatever. But it was just tons of tedious manual work. Set a coding agent on that. And I imagine other places have. Like, again, I think it all comes down to the level of access you might be comfortable giving it, right? Because it's all one thing to suggest. It's another thing to give it the tools to actually go do it. And that's, the places that sort of figure that out. I'm not trying to trivialize the security issues there, but they're solvable. And like the places that solve those and figure those out sooner than later will have just be able to perform, to optimize things better. And it's probably going to be the smaller players first, I would think. But we'll see what happens. I don't know. What are you seeing out there in terms of the level of enthusiasm and use from sort of the higher levels, the bigger shops, the more national papers versus local versus even the one-man shows? I would think there's more enthusiasm on the lower end, but I don't know. We're a few years into this thing now.
Yeah, there is. I mean, in 23, a lot of the newsroom trainings I did were for tiny weekly papers that were, members of press associations, and I was sort of traveling the country. And every now and then I would come across, an example in rural North Carolina of a father-son team, and the teen is a nerd who knows how to do a little bit of code and figured out how to create a pipeline that downloads, then transcribes school board meetings, turns them immediately summarizes them into a newsletter, which gets edited very briefly and sent out to 500 people that need to know what happened in that school board meeting. Now that was like 2 years ago. So I think you see these small organizations that are they are absolutely resource strapped, and they need to find ways to get important information to audiences, and they don't have time to sit around and debate about like you mentioned security issues, and they just figure out a way to do it. So I hear stories like that all the time from small organizations. And then you're seeing what like the New York Times is doing with the Manosphere monitor that they are doing. That's the AI pipeline that's basically listening to hundreds of podcasts that no one should ever subject themselves to. But you see big shops that are able to put what these little tiny guys are doing. They're able to like do it at scale and maybe do it in a way that is a little bit more uniform, so to speak. So it's the thing that I've run into too is a lot of times it's hard to get organizations to talk about what they're doing with AI. So Ben Welsh and Scott Klein put out a great piece in Open News recently about how you've seen the decline in open source code repositories and open data, and used to see 5 years ago, news nerds, whenever they would do a really cool investigation or build a really cool tool, they would share it in a public repository on GitHub, and you don't see that anymore, or very, very rarely. And so a lot of newsrooms are building like really cool AI pipelines, and you're just not hearing about them. And that might be a resource thing. They don't have the time to put it online, or it's what I found is it's a little bit like pulling teeth. Now you do have the, like LenFest and the American Journalism Project. They got funding from tech companies to do AI experiments. So they are sort of, they are very public about what the newsrooms are doing. Basically, because they are required to be. So that's great. Those labs are fantastic, but I would really love to see more newsrooms, small and big, open sourcing some of the cool things they're doing with AI, so we can, experiment and iterate and do all sorts of cool things.
Nice. I'd love to ask you a little bit about the pushback that we're seeing recently around unions in newsrooms. And there's a lot of concerns about AI that are voiced from them, so a lot of them justified. I guess, do you see concerns that are sometimes maybe overblown, or is it impeding certain places' ability to innovate? What is the right way to balance like the legit concerns of a workforce, particularly around like labor, right? And like what positions, what happens to staff and headcount with regard to AI and the fear of replacement, but also like still enables them to experiment and sort of stay ahead of the curve and compete with people that are doing innovative things with AI.
It's I totally empathize with the unions and their aims with wanting a say in AI ethics policies. They should. I mean, if you look at Poynter's AI ethics guidelines, one of our principles is around a diverse ethics committee, a diverse AI ethics committee when you're coming up with policies. The policy should be decided from a group of people that includes people all the way down at the bottom level of an organization, all the way up to the top. It should always be a discussion between management and staff. Now, during the development, a lot of these AI ethics guidelines, like years ago, there would be steering committees that would put them together. I don't think unions were as involved with a lot of the ethics policies. And so now that organizations are maybe revisiting them, new tools are coming out that are requiring updates to policies. We are seeing these tools gain the ability to, like summarize, for example, like summarizing content that somebody is going to see, like the summary bullet points at the top. There are plenty of ethics policies that would totally ban that, because that's, AI content that's being served directly to a person in the audience. And what we're seeing is these tools are getting so good, and there is a need to have summaries and bullet points and things like that, that it's becoming almost a no-brainer to, have AI do something like that. As far as what these policies mean for innovation, our AI ethics policy, someone at Newsroom Leader recently was kind of complaining, and they were like, Poynter's policy is so long, like there's so much in it, and it's almost prescriptive. And the idea around our policy was like, we want to throw everything in there so a newsroom can kind of pull what works for them. What I'll say about the job replacement thing, I always go back to the Texas Tribune's policy, which was one of the first that came out that I've been referencing since I started teaching AI. And the first bullet point, I believe, is that AI will not be used to replace a journalist. And I think it's good to make that statement. And I think it is a strong signal from a news organization to the audience that these tools are an augmentation. You are not getting news directly from a robot. And so, I think having something like that in a policy is very powerful, and it's in plenty of policies. But there are definitely parts of policies that unions want changed. For example, disclosures. So
right.
There is it's sort of seems like a broad mandate for transparency. The language I've seen used is in the news gathering process, there needs to be transparency around that. And so I can see why management might be against including something like that in AI ethics policy, because then that, means that if I am using AI to write a Python script to scrape a website for investigation, then I'm going to have to explain that to the audience.
Well, not even that. You might use Perplexity and ask it for some analysis, and maybe use that in some form.
Exactly. So I think disclosures are really going to be the thing that is going to change quite a bit over the next 2 years as these tools get better and better and better. And so locking in an organization with a specific disclosure policy right now, especially around just saying in the news gathering process, I think that is something that can stifle innovation that maybe is not absolutely necessary. And we need to be really, really, I think audience attitudes around AI are going to change. They already are changing. 1% of chat queries were for something news related in 2023, in that study. And now we know that number is, many times greater than that. People are using it for, chatbots for news more. They're getting more comfortable with AI. They may say they hate AI, but they're still using AI. And so I think disclosure policies need to evolve with how our audience feel about it. And we've seen that can totally change in a year's time. So locking something like that into a policy, I think, can be problematic.
I got to say, one of the things that surprises me when I hear isn't part of a policy, even if they have one, or they just don't think about it. I don't know. There's having the policy and there's living it. And this is what I'm getting at is AI copy, whether it's partial or total, which again, I think the reason it's not thought about is it's in the business of news reporting and journalism. It's it's almost unthinkable, right? What? What are you doing using it? But the thing is, I do feel like that goalpost is shifting probably faster than most people realize. And because when I have done work here and there, it's not in any document, like freelance work. there's never discussion. There's just kind of this unspoken assumption that I'm not going to use AI for the submission, which I won't. But I'm just always surprised why wouldn't you specify that somewhere so that it's in writing? Because as we've seen in several times of the last few years, like this is one of the holes I feel like in a lot of AI policies, that even if the newsroom might be on the same page, like contributors might not be. And there's I often get from editors, oh, like I hadn't thought about that. And if there's in my mind, if there's an urgent thing that has to be like almost on page one of every newsroom policy, is like really clarifying that if you don't want AI copy, like say that. Do you find that that's a gap, or is it that just the people I'm dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you think about contributors, I think
And
that
also
is
people coming through college now, right? Again, I would think there's also like a problem at the bottom of the pipeline, but yeah, both of those things.
Yeah. I mean, it's you're right that I think we sort of operated on the assumption that no one would ever write whole hog with AI.
Right.
And so when we started getting submissions from freelancers that were written in large part with AI, and I mean, right now there's an issue with essentially these these scammers that are tricking people with fully AI generated stories, fake bylines, and selling them to legitimate news organizations.
Yeah,
So
that's
I think
kind of an extreme case. I'm more getting at like someone who has AI so woven into their process that either partially, usually partially, but like it can be like, oh, I used it to research and I've just pasted it in, but the other stuff's mine. Like these gray areas, I feel like are the thing that's probably happening. I'm my sort of data point on this is a study that came out last fall that actually, and again, this wasn't definitive, but it did sort of scan some of the major websites like the Journal, the Times, and others for AI copy, and found it was there, but most often in the opinion section, which of course can be often contributors, people who aren't regularly on staff. So the standard for AI copy in the real world versus the business of news seems to be that that's a divide that is rapidly widening.
Yeah. I was familiar with that study, and the number was like staggering too. I remember the figure being way high, and the number, like the amount that opinion columnists and letters to the editor were generating.
Yeah, it wasn't a fraction of a percent. It was several digits into positive territory. But anyway, I just feel, I don't know, this is just something I'm starting to notice more and more, and it manifests in a few different ways on how AI copy is sort of seeping in all these things. And again, it's just a reality I think newsrooms have to deal with, and it should be front and center in policy.
Yeah, and being very clear if it's not part of your policy, being very, very clear about it not being part of your policy so people understand. Now,
for sure.
I think journalists we hold ourselves to a higher standard, and I think we still very, very much care about craft. And I think you talk to journalists, we're all control freaks too. And so I will
perfectionists.
Yeah, control freaks and perfectionists. So I've tried to use it to write. I've tried to use it to write for me. I've tried to use it to write LinkedIn posts, and I just end up completely rewriting it. And it may not necessarily be because it's bad copy, but it's just I'm like, why are you saying this? Why are you saying that? Yeah, it doesn't. And that could change. I mean, I think it'll be really interesting. I wish we could sort of look into the future and see how people feel about being, given AI copy or reading AI copy, because, now you can just create a Claude skill that, completely changes the way AI writes and makes it write more like a human. You could train it on your own writing, so it does sound, more like you. Although I've tried and it hasn't been great. So I remember being at AEJMC 2 years ago and thinking out loud, doing the journalist thing and raising my hand in this session. It was on a session on AI, and saying, who would be the first major player that would just publish an AI article? And I'm not talking about like the Gannett, like sports
Right, or
articles. I'm
Sports
not talking
Illustrated.
about that.
Yeah.
I was like, who is going to be the first? And is that going to open the floodgates to the point where it's going to be generally understood by news consumers that, if you're reading a breaking news story, it was probably written by AI. And I don't think we've seen that yet. Like the Washington Post is definitely doing lots of experiments with its podcasts and, with the chat bot and, AI summaries are happening at the top of like tons and tons of articles. But I'm always very curious about when are we going to hit the tipping point where the public doesn't care?
Yeah, it's a really good
something.
question. I think you're right. And what you're getting at, I don't think has happened yet. There's been a lot of experimentation, a lot of co-authoring, not that much, but some from legit players.
Yeah.
And no one has like put this forward as like, this is how we're going to do things, or we're allowing this on a level broadly, because I don't think you're ever going to have like fully, I mean, you can have fully authored when it's like something wrote, but I do think there's always going to be a bit of like co-authoring, checking it, and how that it could be like the industry of editor bylines gets, a different way of attributing. So you have like by this, but edited fully by this human. And will it get, we're talking far future when we get in, I think, into fully AI on all of that. Then it's like bots for bots.
Maybe
What are
far
we even doing?
future. Yeah, I don't know. And that's the thing too, is, are we just totally having the wrong conversation? Are we totally, the thing that I worry about quite a bit is that are we sort of putting a brand new engine in like an old beat up Hyundai? And no reason, like nothing against Hyundai or anything, but in trying to incorporate AI into how to write a better article or how to serve news in the way it's being served right now, are we doing that? Are we not thinking about like the news experience of the future when we're sitting here talking about, well, how much AI text is, is correct? And, how should we stop people from serving it? Like they say that the death of the article, I mean, maybe people will be just listening to every single, news source that they consume in 2 years. And are we thinking enough about how we're going to address the ethics of sort of the future, the newsroom of the future? And that's the conversation we're trying to have this year.
We're kind of out of time, but this is actually circling back to exactly where we started, which is trust. And to me, it comes down to what does the audience trust? And I wanted to get back to that anyway, but I was going to ask about disclosure and how that affects the audience. But I honestly think where we're landing here is better in that, assuming there's humans creating stories for other humans, that's a consistency. I think the trust stems from, I see the human judgment and hand in this, whatever is coming at me, whether it's AI words, human words, AI speech, whatever. But as long as that judgment, I can see it as an audience member, then I'll give you some trust. If I don't, then I'm like, what am I even doing? You know what I mean? And again, that's a very broad, abstract rule, and I don't know how it manifests on all these mediums, especially with how quickly everything is changing. But to me, that's kind of where I would sort of find the pillar that's sort of holding this whole thing up, if there is one. Anyway,
it is.
Sorry, that wasn't a question. That was just
no. But it is a human involvement, and it's just what it comes down to is people know it when they see it. People can feel it when they're being served something that is soulless AI that's been produced in a destructive, irresponsible, unethical way. They can feel it and they reject it. And so it's what Ben Collins, the CEO of The Onion, says all the time. He's been doing the circuit right now that AI can't be funny. And I think that's a way to really sum it all up, is that you can create a news story completely with AI and serve it to people, but it just will not have the same human feeling. Like there's just, I think people can understand and feel that human connection. They know, and they almost know it deep down when there's been a human in the loop. And I'm saying that now, it might be in 2 years, I might be looking back and thinking, wow, I was totally wrong about this.
Nice. I usually end these podcasts with a question about what you're hopeful for and what you are maybe fearful of with AI, but I kind of think we just covered it. Unless you have anything to add on either of those camps.
No, I mean, I'm equally hopeful and fearful because the technology is getting so good that I can, completely revamp and update my website and turn it into some crazy app or create software in 2 seconds. But anyone can do that now, which means bad people can do that and create video and audio. And so this question is always hard because this technology changes so fast. It's so hard to guess what's going to come. What fresh horror awaits us next week.
Right. Doesn't mean the stuff, even though everyone can do it, doesn't mean the stuff you're going to create isn't going to be awesome. So
yeah,
don't get discouraged. All right. This is awesome. Thanks, Alex. We could have gone on for easily another 3 hours, I'm sure, about all these things, but we're going to have you back. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. First time, long time. So I'm really happy I was able to do this.
Amazing. Take care. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Alex Mahadevan. The Media Copilot is a podcast, and it would be fantastic if you'd give the show a star rating if you're on Spotify, a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and a review if you're on Apple. All those things really do help the show because it'll put our podcast in front of more people. The Media Copilot podcast is produced by Michelle Musso and Ryan Huntington of Musso Media. Look for their link in the show notes, and don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter as well. Thanks again for being here and following the podcast, and I'll be seeing you in the future.